The afternoon sun was beating down on the windshield of my SUV as I pulled into the quiet, gated community of Oakwood Estates. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the department, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed. On the passenger seat sat 3 heavy bags of groceries, including a prime rib roast I had planned to slow cook for my Sunday off. Being the chief of police in a city like this means you rarely get a moment of peace, so I cherished these small domestic rituals. As I reached the electronic gate, I noticed a silver sedan idling right in the middle of the entrance, blocking anyone from entering or leaving. I tapped my horn lightly, thinking someone was just having trouble with their keycard. That is when I saw him. A teenager, probably 19 or 20, stepped out of the silver sedan. He was wearing a designer tracksuit and had an expression of pure entitlement plastered across his face. He walked up to my window and banged on the glass. I lowered it just an inch, keeping my professional composure even though I was exhausted. He did not ask for help. He did not apologize for blocking the gate. Instead, he looked at my grocery bags and said that he was hungry and that I should give him the bags because his mother was the head of the homeowners association and they basically owned the street. I stared at him for a moment, genuinely confused. I asked him if he was joking. He told me he was dead serious and that if I did not hand over the prime rib and the rest of the bags, he would make sure I was evicted by the end of the week. I leaned back and chuckled, which was clearly the wrong move. The kid started screaming, calling me a loser and a lowlife. He reached for my door handle, trying to pull it open. I locked the doors immediately. He began kicking my tires and shouting that I was stealing from him. It was the most absurd display of privilege I had ever seen in my 20 years of law enforcement. Suddenly, a woman came sprinting from the nearby sidewalk. She was dressed in an expensive power suit, clutching a clipboard like it was a holy relic. This was the infamous Linda, the HOA president everyone in the neighborhood forum complained about. She did not even look at me. She went straight to her son, asking him what was wrong. The boy pointed a finger at me and lied through his teeth. He told her that I had jumped out of my car and threatened him because he was moving too slowly. He claimed I had stolen those groceries from their porch earlier that day. Linda turned toward my car, her face turning a deep shade of crimson. She began pounding on my hood, screaming that she was calling the police. She told me that I had picked the wrong house to mess with and that she had the local precinct on speed dial. She kept shouting that she knew the law and that people like me did not belong in a prestigious neighborhood like Oakwood. I sat there, stone-faced, watching her dial 911. She was breathing heavily into the phone, telling the dispatcher that there was a dangerous, aggressive thief at the front gate who was assaulting her son. I knew exactly which dispatcher was taking that call. I knew exactly which officers would be dispatched to this location. I decided right then that I would not say a single word about my identity. I wanted to see exactly how far this woman would go. I reached into my glove box and hit the record button on my personal dash camera, making sure it captured her screaming at my window and her son trying to key my door with his house keys. They thought they were the kings of this castle, but they had no idea they were currently committing multiple felonies in front of the man who signed the paychecks of every officer in the city. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Linda was now standing in front of my bumper, arms crossed, refusing to let me move. She told me that the police were coming to take me to jail and that she would personally oversee the seizure of my vehicle. Her son was laughing now, filming me on his phone and calling me a broke old man. He told me that his mom was going to have my car towed and sold at an auction.
I just looked at my watch.
It would take approximately 4 minutes for a patrol car to arrive from the North Station. I used those 4 minutes to calmly check my emails, which only seemed to make Linda angrier. She started screaming that I was being disrespectful and that my silence was an admission of guilt. The distant wail of sirens began to echo through the suburban streets. Linda gave me a smug, jagged smile. She adjusted her blazer and told her son to stand back so the officers could tackle me if I tried to run. I stayed in my seat, hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. 2 patrol cars swung around the corner, lights flashing red and blue. They pulled up behind my SUV, effectively boxing me in. Officers Miller and Rodriguez stepped out. I knew them well. Miller was a rookie I had personally pinned a commendation on just last month, and Rodriguez was a veteran who had been with the force for 15 years. Linda did not wait for them to approach. She ran toward them, gesturing wildly at my car. She was shouting that I was a criminal and a vagrant who had somehow gotten a keycard to the community. She told Miller that I had robbed her son and that I was armed and dangerous. I watched in my rearview mirror as Miller looked at my license plate. I saw the moment of realization hit him. He blinked, looked at the plate again, and then looked at Rodriguez. Rodriguez's eyes went wide. They both knew my personal vehicle, but they were professionals. They saw me give a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. They understood the assignment immediately. Rodriguez walked up to Linda and asked her to calm down and explain exactly what happened. Linda went into a theatrical performance. She claimed I had brandished a weapon and told her son that I would end him if he did not give me his car. The son nodded along, adding that I had used racial slurs and tried to run him over. It was a complete fabrication, a web of lies designed to ruin a man's life over a bag of groceries and a bruised ego. Rodriguez kept a straight face, taking notes in his pocketbook. He asked her if she was absolutely sure about these details, reminding her that filing a false police report was a serious crime. Linda scoffed and told him not to lecture her. She told Rodriguez that she was a personal friend of the mayor and that she expected me to be in handcuffs within the next 60 seconds. She then pointed at my grocery bags and demanded that the officers hand them over to her son immediately, since they were rightfully theirs. Miller walked over to my window. He tapped on the glass. I lowered it all the way. He looked at me, then at the groceries, then back at me. He asked for my license and registration in a very loud, formal voice for the benefit of the audience watching from the sidewalk. I handed him my documents. As he took them, I whispered for him to play along for just a few more minutes. He nodded slightly and walked back to his cruiser to run my name. Meanwhile, Linda was heckling me from the side. She was telling the neighbors who had come out of their houses that I was a predator and that she was keeping the neighborhood safe. Her son was leaning against the patrol car, acting like he was the hero of the story. He even had the audacity to ask Rodriguez if he could keep my SUV once it was impounded. Rodriguez walked over to the son and asked him to point out exactly which groceries were his. The boy pointed at the prime rib and the expensive organic produce. Rodriguez asked if he had a receipt. Linda chimed in, saying they had lost the receipt but that the store clerks would surely remember them. At this point, I decided to step out of the vehicle. As soon as my boots hit the pavement, Linda started screaming for the officers to draw their weapons. She claimed I was lunging at her. Neither officer moved a muscle. They just stood there, watching the meltdown occur. I stood by my door, towering over the teenager who had been bullying me minutes earlier. I asked Linda if she wanted to rethink her statement. I told her that there were cameras everywhere and that honesty was her best policy right now. She laughed in my face. She called me a pathetic nobody and said that by tomorrow morning I would be rotting in a cell while she enjoyed my steak. She then turned to Rodriguez and demanded to know why I wasn't in handcuffs yet. She threatened to call the police chief himself to have Rodriguez fired for incompetence. That was the moment I had been waiting for. Rodriguez looked at me, and I gave him the signal. He turned to Linda and said that she was right, it was time to call the chief. Linda looked triumphant. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through her contacts, likely looking for a city hall number she had saved. Rodriguez stopped her. He told her she did not need to search her phone because the chief was already standing right in front of her. The silence that followed was deafening. The neighborhood spectators leaned in, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Linda looked at Rodriguez, then slowly turned her head toward me. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my leather badge wallet. I flipped it open, revealing the gold shield that gleamed in the sunlight. I looked her dead in the eye and introduced myself as Chief Harrison of the City Police Department. I saw the blood drain from her face. Her son's jaw literally dropped, and he took a shaky step back toward their car. Linda started stammering, her voice jumping 3 octaves. She tried to say that there must be some mistake and that I didn't look like a police chief. I told her that a police chief looks like any other citizen when he is off duty, but he never stops being a peace officer. I turned to Officer Miller and asked him to read back the statements Linda and her son had just provided. Miller stepped forward and read the notes out loud. He recounted her claims of assault, the brandishing of a weapon, and the theft of property. I then pointed to my dash camera and informed her that every second of their interaction, from the moment her son blocked the gate to her pounding on my hood, had been recorded in high-definition audio and video. I told her that not only had I not stolen anything, but her son had attempted to extort me and had intentionally damaged my vehicle. The son tried to bolt for the car, but Rodriguez was faster. He grabbed the boy by the arm and spun him around, clicking a pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. Linda began to wail. She wasn't screaming in anger anymore. She was screaming in pure, unadulterated terror. She started pleading with me, saying she was just trying to protect her son and that she was under a lot of stress from the HOA board. I told her that being under stress did not give her the right to attempt to frame an innocent man for multiple felonies. I told her that she had weaponized the police force for her own petty ego. I instructed Miller to arrest Linda as well. As the handcuffs tightened around her wrists, she began to cry, begging the neighbors not to film her. But it was too late. Every neighbor she had bullied over the last 3 years was standing there with their phones out, capturing the HOA queen's fall from grace. They were cheering quietly, some even clapping as she was led toward the back of the second patrol car. I looked at her son, who was now sobbing and calling for his mother. I felt a small pang of pity for the kid, but then I remembered him kicking my tires and threatening my home. I walked over to the silver sedan that was still blocking the gate. I asked Rodriguez to call for a heavy-duty tow truck. Since the vehicle was used in the commission of an attempted robbery and extortion, I ordered it to be impounded for evidence. Linda started screaming from the back of the police car that she had ice cream in her trunk that would melt. I simply looked at her and said that she should have thought about that before she tried to put me in prison. I told her that the law applies to everyone, even those who think they run the neighborhood. The tow truck arrived 15 minutes later. The neighbors watched in delight as the silver sedan was hooked up and dragged away. Linda and her son were processed right there on the street. I stayed on the scene to give my formal statement to Miller. I made sure to include the detail about her son demanding my groceries. As I spoke, I could see Linda watching me through the window of the cruiser. The realization that she was facing years of legal trouble and the loss of her reputation was finally sinking in. Her reign of terror over Oakwood Estates was officially over. The next morning, I arrived at the precinct in my full dress uniform. I had a mountain of paperwork to sign, but the most important folder on my desk was the one labeled with Linda's name. My phone had been ringing off the hook with calls from the mayor's office and various HOA board members. Everyone wanted to know what had happened. I stayed professional. I released the dashcam footage to the Internal Affairs Department and the district attorney. The evidence was irrefutable. There was no way for her to wiggle out of this one with a simple apology or a fine. The district attorney decided to go hard on the case. They charged Linda with filing a false police report, harassment, and 2 counts of felony perjury. Her son was charged with attempted robbery and vandalism. Because they had lied so extensively to responding officers, the DA wanted to make an example out of them. They wanted to show the public that the police are not a personal hit squad for the wealthy and entitled. During the preliminary hearing, Linda tried to look humble. She wore a modest dress and kept her head down, but when the video was played in court, her true colors were shown to the world. The video showed her screaming like a banshee and her son laughing while he keyed my car. The judge was visibly disgusted. He noted that their actions could have led to a violent confrontation if the responding officers hadn't been so well trained. He set a high bail, which Linda struggled to pay because the HOA had recently frozen her accounts, pending an audit. It turns out that once people stop being afraid of a bully, they start looking into their books. The HOA board discovered that Linda had been embezzling funds for years to pay for her son's lifestyle and her own legal fees. A few months later, the sentencing came down. Linda received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, which she had to perform picking up trash along the highway she used to drive her luxury car on. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Her son was sentenced to a juvenile boot camp and ordered to pay for the damages to my vehicle. They ended up having to sell their house in Oakwood Estates to cover their legal debts. On the day they moved out, the neighbors held a block party. I was invited to that party, of course. I showed up with that same prime rib roast, finally cooked to perfection. I sat on my porch and watched the moving truck pull away. Linda saw me as they drove past. She didn't scream this time. She just looked away, her face full of shame. I didn't feel a sense of triumph, just a sense of balance. The system had worked. A woman who thought she was above the law found out that the law is a giant that doesn't care about your title or your zip code. I still live in Oakwood Estates. It is a much quieter place now. There are no more petty fines for the wrong color of mulch or for leaving a trash can out an hour too long. People wave to each other. They help each other with groceries. Sometimes, when I'm pulling through the gate after a long shift, I think about that afternoon. I think about how a simple bag of groceries changed the entire landscape of this community. It was a reminder that integrity matters, and that no matter how much power you think you have, there is always someone who can hold you accountable. I finished my steak that night with a glass of red wine, looking out at the peaceful street. My SUV was fixed, the paint was flawless, and the groceries were long gone. But the lesson remained. I am the chief of police, but more importantly, I am a citizen who believes in justice. And justice, as Linda found out, is a dish best served with a side of cold, hard truth. The gate to the community clicked shut behind the moving truck, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. I went inside, turned off the lights, and finally got the sleep I had been waiting for since that chaotic afternoon.